Little girl to paralyzed black billionaire. I'll heal you for leftovers, she laughs. Then everything changes. Before we continue, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel as we dish out fresh, engaging stories daily. Enjoy the story. It was noon already in Texas, and the heat of the day was bearing down on the streets of New York, a city known for its opulence. Zoe Mitchell, a 12-year-old girl from the other side of town, walked down the busy sidewalk, her stomach growling loudly as she passed expensive restaurants and upscale stores. The sights around her were a stark contrast to her own life, where meals were scarce and luxury was a world she could only dream of. Today, however, Zoe had a mission she had been planning for days. She had spent the past week observing Sophia Williams, the reclusive billionaire who had been paralyzed after a tragic accident. Zoe had seen her from a distance, always in her wheelchair, parked outside the grand restaurant, sipping drinks alone, as if the world had forgotten her. She had spent her days living in isolation, surrounded by wealth and luxury, while Zoe and her grandmother struggled to make ends meet in a rundown apartment across the street. Today, Zoe wasn't content with just observing. She was going to speak to her. As Zoe approached the restaurant, she saw Sophia sitting at the outdoor courtyard, her eyes fixed on the empty space before her, her wheelchair parked at a prime spot in front of the bustling city. Zoe hesitated for a moment, but then her resolve hardened. With a deep breath, she walked up to Sophia. The cold steel of the wheelchair seemed to symbolize the walls Sophia had built around herself over the years. "Excuse me, ma'am," Zoe said, her voice steady, though her heart pounded in her chest. "I can heal you, in exchange for your leftovers." Sophia looked up from her glass, her eyes scanning Zoe from head to toe, her lips curling into a smirk. The disdain was immediate. "What are you saying, little girl?" Sophia's voice was sharp and cold. "Do you think I would trust a poor street kid like you? Do you really believe you can do what the best doctors in the world couldn't?" Zoe didn't flinch. "I'm not joking. I can help you walk again. All I need is the food you're throwing away." Sophia's laugh was bitter and cutting, echoing through the courtyard. "Oh, really?" she sneered. "You think a child like you, who probably doesn't even know how to read, could possibly do something a team of the best specialists couldn't? I've spent millions of dollars on medical treatment, and you think some scraps from my plate will change anything?" Zoe stood firm. She had anticipated this. People like Sophia, wealthy, proud, and stubborn, didn't trust easily, especially not someone like her. But Zoe wasn't backing down. She had watched Sophia long enough to know that her condition wasn't just physical. Zoe's gaze never wavered as she said, "You take 3 white pills and 1 blue one every day at exactly 2 in the afternoon. And you always complain about your legs feeling cold, even when it's warm out." Sophia's expression shifted instantly. The smugness faded from her face as surprise flickered in her eyes. "How do you know that?" Her voice was quieter now, the arrogance slipping for the first time. Zoe didn't answer immediately. She had already studied her. She had spent the last few days carefully watching Sophia, how she moved, the signs of pain, the little habits she had that no one else seemed to notice. She had learned to read people, a skill she had developed over the years taking care of her ailing grandmother. Zoe knew that Sophia's paralysis wasn't just an accident or a medical condition. It was something deeper, a mental and emotional wound that had been festering for years. "You're not paralyzed by the accident, are you?" Zoe continued. "It's your guilt, isn't it? You've spent so many years hiding it, but it's been weighing on you, hasn't it? The guilt from your past, the things you've done that you wish you could erase." Sophia's eyes widened. For the first time, there was a crack in her carefully constructed armor. She hadn't expected this. Zoe took a step closer. "I can help you. I can heal you, but you have to be willing to face the truth. I know what you've been trying to avoid for all these years, and the only way to move forward is to confront it." Sophia stared at the young girl before her, her lips parted in disbelief. She had spent so long surrounded by doctors, the best money could buy, all promising to cure her, all of them failing. And now here was this child, with no formal training, offering her something more than any of them had, truth. Zoe's grandmother had taught her that true healing came not just from medicine, but from understanding the heart and mind. The body could only heal once the spirit did. And Zoe knew that Sophia's paralysis wasn't just in her legs. It was rooted in her mind and heart. The physical paralysis was just a symptom of something deeper, something only the truth could resolve. Sophia's voice trembled as she asked, "What do you mean by that? How do you know so much about me?" Zoe smiled softly, her gaze kind. "I've been watching you. I know that you've been punishing yourself for years. And I know that no doctor can fix what's wrong with you until you face what you've been hiding from." For a moment, Sophia didn't speak. She was silent, her eyes staring at the table in front of her. Zoe could almost see the walls inside the woman crumble, piece by piece. She had spent so many years building her empire, hiding her guilt behind wealth and pride. But now, for the first time, the truth was staring her in the face. Zoe's voice was gentle but firm. "I can help you, but you have to want to heal. You have to face your past, let go of the pain you've been holding on to." Sophia took a shaky breath, the walls that had guarded her for so long beginning to falter. She wasn't sure what to think, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel so alone. The days after Zoe's bold proposal were filled with uncertainty, but there was a fire burning in her gut that couldn't be extinguished. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeply wrong with Sophia Williams, something that went far beyond the accident. Sophia's paralysis was a symptom, not a cause, and Zoe knew she had to find out what that cause was if she was going to help her. Zoe had learned to read people, to observe the details that others overlooked. She knew how to look past the surface, into the hidden layers that others carefully concealed. Her grandmother had taught her that everything had a story, even the smallest thing. A bruise, a hesitation in speech, a nervous glance. They all meant something, if you knew how to interpret them. And Zoe had become an expert. She started her investigation late one evening, after her grandmother had gone to bed. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the hum of the old fan in the corner. Zoe sat at the small kitchen table with a pile of newspapers, old articles, and a battered laptop. Her grandmother had always warned her about the dangers of obsession, but this felt different. This wasn't just curiosity. This was the kind of knowledge she needed to heal someone, to fix what was broken in Sophia. Zoe began by combing through public records, gathering any information she could find on Sophia. There was little about the woman's personal life that wasn't carefully hidden behind layers of wealth and secrecy. But Zoe was patient. She knew how to search, how to piece together clues from scraps of information that others would have missed. The more Zoe read, the more she found herself fascinated, yet disturbed. There were whispers of Sophia's ruthlessness in the business world. Articles from years ago spoke of her ability to crush competitors without a second thought, how she built her tech empire through manipulation and underhanded tactics. She had been admired for her brilliance, but Zoe could see the darker side of her success. Her wealth was built on the backs of those she had used and discarded. But it wasn't the business dealings that caught Zoe's attention, it was the rumors. The whispered stories that no one dared to speak out loud, the quiet things people said when they thought no one was listening. There were murmurs of people who had crossed Sophia, of colleagues who had mysteriously disappeared after having a falling out with her. There was talk of deals made in dark corners, of broken promises, of families destroyed by her ambition. Zoe dug deeper. She found interviews from years ago, before the accident, where Sophia spoke about her work, her vision, and her success. In every word, Zoe could sense the pride, the arrogance that had built up over time. But in some of the older interviews, Zoe noticed something else. A darkness behind her eyes, a hint of something that wasn't just about power or business. It was about guilt, a guilt that ran deeper than anything Zoe had imagined. There were times in the interviews where Sophia's words faltered, where her eyes would shift, and her voice would drop slightly, as if she were afraid of being exposed. It was in those moments that Zoe felt a shiver down her spine. The guilt, Zoe realized, wasn't just an afterthought. It was part of Sophia's soul, haunting her every decision. Zoe leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Everything was starting to fit together. The more she learned, the clearer it became. Sophia's paralysis wasn't physical. It wasn't the result of the accident at all. It was a psychosomatic response, a psychological defense mechanism built over years of buried guilt. Her mind had trapped her in the chair, and her body was merely following orders. She had locked herself in that wheelchair because her mind couldn't move past the sins of her past. Zoe's heart raced as she put the pieces together. She had been right all along. Sophia's body wasn't broken. It was her mind that had imprisoned her. And if Zoe could help her confront the past, she could free her. It wasn't about healing her legs. It was about healing her spirit. Zoe knew that if Sophia couldn't face what she had done, the paralysis would never go away. It wasn't about the physical body. It was about addressing the mind and soul first. The room felt suffocating as Zoe sat in the quiet. She wasn't afraid of what she had learned. She felt more determined than ever. She had a plan. The research had given her the answers, but now it was time to confront Sophia. It was time to help her face the truth. Zoe had always believed that healing began with honesty and self-awareness. She had to get Sophia to confront her guilt, to open up to the pain she had buried for so long. Only then would the chains of her mind begin to loosen. Zoe stood up, pacing the room. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Healing doesn't come from the hands alone, Zoe. It comes from the heart, from understanding the pain that lies within. Zoe had always believed that, but now she understood it in a way she never had before. True healing starts with the mind. Until Sophia faced the darkness within herself, she would never be able to move forward. Zoe sat back down at the table, closing the laptop. The information she had gathered wasn't just knowledge, it was power. Zoe wasn't just a poor girl from the other side of town anymore. She was a healer, and this was her moment. The young girl believed that Sophia's mind was the key to her healing. Zoe knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready. She had faced many challenges in her life, but this would be the hardest. Confronting someone like Sophia, someone who had spent her entire life hiding behind a wall of pride and guilt, would take courage. But Zoe had that courage. She had it in abundance. Tomorrow, Zoe would confront Sophia. She would show her that healing wasn't about medical treatments, about pills or doctors. It was about confronting the past, about releasing the weight of guilt, and about accepting the truth. Only then could Sophia begin to walk again, not with her legs, but with her soul. The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time Zoe reached Sophia Williams' mansion. The grand estate loomed before her, an imposing symbol of everything Sophia had worked for, a fortress built on power, wealth, and secrets. Zoe had walked past it countless times, her gaze often drawn to the pristine marble exterior, the tall iron gates, the sprawling gardens that seemed to mock her. But tonight, Zoe wasn't here as an outsider admiring the wealth she could never touch. No, tonight she was here to confront Sophia Williams. Zoe took a deep breath, her fingers trembling slightly as she adjusted the old satchel slung over her shoulder. She could feel the weight of the evidence inside. Pages of research, articles, and interviews she had painstakingly gathered over the past week. It wasn't just facts. It was the truth. Sophia's paralysis wasn't physical. It was psychological, a manifestation of guilt that had slowly consumed her. The moment Zoe stepped inside the mansion, she was greeted by the cold beauty of the place. High ceilings, intricate chandeliers, and polished floors. Every corner screamed of excess, of a life lived without limitations. But Zoe wasn't dazzled by the grandeur. She had a purpose here, and no amount of gold or marble could shake her resolve. She was led through the grand hallway to the room where Sophia spent most of her days, an expansive, opulent living room filled with expensive furniture and large windows that looked out over the vast estate. And there, as Zoe had expected, sat Sophia Williams. Sophia's wheelchair was placed at the center of the room, as though the space itself was built around her. She was staring out the window, lost in her own thoughts, her back straight, her posture regal even in her state. When she turned to face Zoe, there was a flicker of amusement in her eyes, a slight quirk of her lips. Well, Sophia said, her voice smooth and dismissive. If it isn't the little girl with the big ideas. What do you want, child? Zoe didn't flinch. She had spent too many nights thinking about this moment. She was ready. I'm not a child, Zoe said, her voice steady, with an edge that matched the seriousness of the situation. And I'm not here to ask for your leftovers. I'm here to tell you the truth. Sophia raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a mocking smile. The truth? And what truth would that be? Zoe stepped forward, closing the distance between them. The luxury of the room seemed to shrink as Zoe's presence filled the space. She pulled out the stack of papers from her bag and laid them out on the coffee table in front of Sophia. The articles, the records, the interviews, proof of everything. Everything Sophia had tried to bury. I've been watching you, Zoe began. I've been listening, and I've learned everything I need to know about you. Your paralysis isn't physical. It's all in your mind, born from the guilt you can't face. Sophia's laughter cut through the air, cold and dismissive. Oh, you're adorable. You really think some child like you can diagnose me? You think you know what I've been through? Zoe remained unfazed. I know more than you think, Sophia. She leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. You've spent years building your empire on manipulation and lies. You've destroyed people to get where you are. And now, the weight of that guilt is keeping you trapped. Sophia's eyes narrowed, her fingers gripping the armrests of her wheelchair. She was trying to hide it, trying to maintain control, but Zoe could see the cracks. Her composure was slipping. You think you know me? Sophia sneered, her voice rising with the remnants of arrogance. You know nothing about the sacrifices I've made to get here. You don't understand what it means to fight for everything you have. Zoe's eyes softened, but her resolve didn't waver. I don't need to know your sacrifices. What I know is that you've ruined lives in the process. You've destroyed families, taken what wasn't yours, and used people as pawns. And now, your body's paying the price. But it's not an accident, Sophia. It's you. You've been holding yourself prisoner in your own mind. Zoe's words hung in the air, like a weight pressing down on the room. For a long moment, there was silence. Sophia didn't speak. She couldn't. The truth Zoe had just laid out was too much. Zoe continued, her voice calm, yet cutting, each word hitting with precision. I found the records, the interviews. The ones where you spoke of your empire with pride, but I saw something else. A glimpse of fear. I saw the hesitation in your eyes when you spoke about the things you've done. You've buried all of it, haven't you? The people you've hurt. The ones you've left behind. Sophia's face twisted, a flicker of something dark crossing her features. She clenched her jaw, but Zoe could see the cracks in her perfect facade. I don't need your sympathy, little girl. Sophia spat, her voice trembling with frustration. You think you know me? You think you can just waltz in here and fix me with your little ideas? Zoe leaned in even closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I don't need to fix you. You need to face the truth. Only then can you start healing. Only then can you walk again, not with your legs, but with your heart. Sophia's hands shook, and for the first time, Zoe saw it. The strong, powerful woman, who had always held the reins of every situation, was beginning to crumble. The guilt was bubbling to the surface, too much to bear. It had been festering inside her for years, and Zoe had found the key to unlocking it. Sophia's voice faltered as she whispered, How do you know all of this? How do you know everything? Zoe's eyes softened, but there was no pity in them, only understanding. Because I've seen it before. The same weight, the same guilt. You're not the first person I've helped, and you don't have to carry it alone anymore. You just have to face it. Sophia's breath came in shallow gasps. The anger and pride that had once defined her were starting to dissolve, replaced by something far more vulnerable, fear. Fear of what would happen if she finally faced the truth. Fear of losing the power that had protected her for so long. And in that moment, Zoe knew. The walls were coming down. Sophia finally spoke, her voice small and broken. What do I do now? Zoe smiled gently, the weight of the moment settling in. Now we begin. The day after Zoe's confrontation with Sophia Williams felt like a weight had been lifted from Zoe's shoulders, but she knew the real battle was yet to come. The truth that had been buried for so long needed to be exposed. Sophia's empire of wealth, secrecy, and manipulation was built on lies, and Zoe was determined to bring it all crashing down. Zoe had gathered everything: articles, interviews, public records, whispers of betrayal, and now she had the weapon she needed. Armed with undeniable proof of Sophia's ruthless business dealings, the people she'd wronged, and the lives she'd destroyed to build her empire, Zoe took the next step. The time for secrecy was over. She stood in front of a crowd that had gathered outside of Sophia's mansion, reporters milling about with cameras and notepads. Zoe wasn't afraid. She had spent too much time in the shadows, watching from the outside. Now, she was stepping into the light, ready to expose the truth. With every ounce of courage, Zoe walked up to the podium set up in the front yard of the mansion. Sophia's mansion loomed behind her, once a symbol of invincibility, now the backdrop to a woman on the verge of unraveling. Today, the truth will be revealed, Zoe began, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. She held up the stack of papers, letting the audience see the documents, the records, and the names of those who had been harmed by Sophia's greed and manipulation. What you see here, Zoe continued, is the real story behind Sophia Williams' fortune. The truth about her business practices, her lies, and the people she's hurt along the way. The crowd fell silent. Cameras clicked, and microphones were thrust in her direction as Zoe presented the evidence to the world. She didn't just speak about Sophia's wrongdoings, she laid them bare. Zoe spoke of the illegal deals, the shady contracts, the families ruined, and the careers destroyed. She spoke of how Sophia had climbed to the top by trampling on others, using and discarding them like pawns in her game of power. As the story spread like wildfire, the fallout was immediate. News outlets picked up the revelations, turning Sophia from the revered billionaire to the villain of the day. Headlines screamed about the manipulative businesswoman whose carefully constructed empire was built on lies. Zoe's voice was everywhere, on TV, in the papers, online. Sophia's facade began to crack. She tried to fight back, of course, but the truth had already taken root. The once untouchable billionaire was now being scrutinized, exposed, and torn apart by public opinion. The press turned against her, and the community that had once revered her began to turn their backs. Those who had once praised her for her success now looked at her with disdain. Sophia's wealth, her power, and her influence began to crumble, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the wreckage of her past. The mansion, the symbol of everything she had worked for, was seized by the authorities. Sophia was arrested, her empire dismantled, her name tarnished forever. The once pristine estate was no longer a symbol of luxury. It was repurposed into something new, a community center, a place where people could come together to heal, to rebuild what was broken. Zoe had won, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been affected by Sophia's cruelty. The mansion that had once been a prison for so many was now a sanctuary. Sophia Williams had fallen, and in her place, a new legacy was born, one of truth, justice, and healing. The once majestic mansion that had been the symbol of Sophia Williams' rise to power now stood as a hollow reminder of her fall. Its walls, which had once echoed with the sounds of lavish parties and whispered secrets, were now silent. The grand staircase, the ornate chandeliers, and the polished floors, once symbols of her empire, had become an empty shell. Sophia's legacy, one built on manipulation and guilt, had crumbled. But from the wreckage of that empire, something new was born. The mansion, seized by the authorities, was no longer just a monument to wealth and privilege. It had been repurposed, transformed into something greater, a beacon of hope and healing for the community. The grand entryway that once welcomed the elite now greeted everyone. People from all walks of life, families, individuals, the elderly, and children, walked through the doors of the mansion-turned-community center. The space, which had once served as a sanctuary for Sophia's arrogance, now became a sanctuary for the broken, the struggling, and the forgotten. At the heart of this transformation was Zoe Mitchell, the girl who had brought down an empire with nothing more than her courage and belief in the truth. Zoe, once a quiet observer from the other side of the street, was now at the forefront of something much bigger than herself. She had been chosen to guide the community center, a responsibility she took on with quiet confidence. Zoe's wisdom, which had once seemed too big for her years, had earned her respect from everyone who entered the center. She wasn't just known for her intelligence. Her healing abilities, both physical and emotional, had set her apart. Zoe understood that true healing didn't come from medicine alone. It came from addressing the root causes of pain. The trauma, the guilt, and the emotional scars that people carried. In the community center, Zoe became more than just a healer. She became a mentor, a counselor, and a symbol of hope. The center flourished under her guidance, offering classes, workshops, and support groups for people struggling with everything from addiction to grief. Zoe had designed every program herself, focusing not only on physical wellness, but also on emotional and psychological support. Healing from the inside out, she believed, was the key to lasting change. It didn't take long for the community to rally behind her. They saw her not as a prodigy or a savior, but as someone who truly cared. The girl who had once walked the streets unnoticed had become a leader, someone who showed others how to face their pain and move forward. Zoe's journey had only just begun, and already, she was changing lives. The community center was thriving, and so was Zoe. She no longer hid in the shadows, and the once-forgotten girl who had faced so many challenges was now a beacon of light. She had gone from being an outsider to being the heart of a movement dedicated to healing, education, and support. In a place that had once represented everything wrong with the world, Zoe Mitchell had built something right. And as the sun set each evening over the newly transformed center, Zoe would stand by the windows, watching the community flourish. The legacy she was building was just beginning to take shape, and it was rooted in hope, compassion, and the belief that change could come, even from the darkest of places. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a soft golden glow over the newly transformed community center. Zoe Mitchell walked slowly through the halls, her footsteps echoing softly against the polished floors. The walls that had once been adorned with the trappings of wealth and privilege were now filled with vibrant murals, messages of hope, and photographs of the people whose lives had been touched by the space. What had once been Sophia Williams' mansion, a symbol of power and secrecy, was now a thriving, vibrant hub for education, healing, and community support. Zoe stopped in front of the large windows that overlooked the garden, her eyes scanning the busy scene below. People of all ages. Children playing, adults attending classes, elders chatting over coffee, walked in and out of the building with purpose. This wasn't just a center, it was a home, a sanctuary. And it had all started because of Zoe. She leaned against the window, her thoughts drifting back to the day she first stepped into this place. The mansion had been cold, empty, just a reminder of Sophia's fall. Now, it had become a symbol of rebirth. Zoe's journey had been long and arduous, full of unexpected twists and turns, but as she stood there, taking in the transformation, she realized how far she had come. She had once been a poor girl who lived on the fringes of the city, a mere observer of the lives of the rich and powerful. She had watched from the shadows, unnoticed, unheard. But through sheer courage, determination, and an unwavering belief in the truth, Zoe had become something entirely different. She was now known as a prodigy, recognized not just for her healing abilities, but for her fierce commitment to exposing the truth and standing up for what was right. Zoe's transformation had been as much about her own healing as it was about helping others. She had discovered that true healing wasn't just about the body. It was about facing one's past, embracing the painful truths, and allowing them to shape a future that was not defined by guilt or shame. Zoe's journey had taken her from a quiet, observant girl to a leader, someone who had helped heal not just the wounded bodies of others, but the fractured spirits that had carried pain for years. As she walked through the halls, Zoe smiled as she passed the rooms where therapy sessions were held, where children learned to read and write, and where support groups gathered to share their stories. She paused at the doorway of a classroom where a young girl was teaching a group of adults how to write. Zoe had built this, a space where people could reclaim their lives, rebuild what had been broken, and embrace the power of healing. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind as she stood there, watching the lives unfolding before her. Healing is not just about fixing what's broken, Zoe. It's about understanding, accepting, and moving forward with strength. Those words had always stayed with Zoe, guiding her through every challenge she faced. And now, looking at the center she had helped create, she understood them more deeply than ever. Zoe walked toward the office where her grandmother was waiting. Her grandmother, the woman who had taught her everything she knew about healing, not just the body, but the soul, was the one person who had always believed in her. They had spent so many hours talking about life, about the power of compassion, about helping others. Her grandmother had passed on the wisdom that had shaped Zoe into who she was today. When Zoe entered the office, her grandmother was sitting at the desk, smiling at her with pride. The lines on her face were softened by the warmth of the room, the warmth of a life lived in love and service. "You've done it, haven't you?" her grandmother said softly, her voice filled with admiration. Zoe smiled, but it was a smile of quiet understanding. She had done it, yes, but it hadn't been just her. It had been the people who had supported her, who had believed in her vision. It had been the community that had rallied around her, the people who had come together to make this transformation possible. She hadn't done it alone. "I couldn't have done it without you," Zoe said, her voice thick with emotion. "You taught me everything, about healing, about love, about how to face the truth. All of this, she gestured toward the windows, this is because of what you taught me. Her grandmother nodded, her eyes sparkling with pride. You always had it in you, Zoe. You just had to see it for yourself. You've always known what it takes to heal. Now, you've given that gift to others. Zoe sat down beside her grandmother, taking her hand in hers. For the first time, Zoe felt a deep sense of contentment. She had walked a hard path, but now, standing at the heart of this thriving community, she realized that the work she had started was far from over. It had only just begun. Zoe had never sought fame or recognition. She had never expected to become the face of something so monumental. But in the quiet of the office, surrounded by the support of her grandmother, Zoe understood her legacy was already being written, not in the grand gestures or headlines, but in the lives she had touched. Her legacy was one of strength, resilience, and the undeniable power of wisdom passed down from one generation to the next. She had given people the tools to heal, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. She had shown them that healing starts with the truth, with facing the pain of the past, and embracing the possibility of a better future. As Zoe looked out the window once more, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had created something that would last. A legacy of hope, healing, and community. The girl who had once walked the streets unnoticed had now become a symbol of transformation. And as she stood at the forefront of this change, Zoe knew that the work she had started here would continue, not just for her, but for everyone who walked through these doors. Her journey had come full circle, and in that moment, Zoe knew the true meaning of healing. It wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about embracing the power of the truth and allowing it to guide you towards something better. Her legacy was one of healing, hope, and the courage to face the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. If you enjoyed Zoe's journey and the powerful transformation of Sophia's mansion into a community center, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Drop your thoughts about how the story ended and what you think about Zoe's impact. How would you rate this story on a scale of 1 to 10? Don't forget to share where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from all of you.